Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Only Land Fan Show. My name is Kendall Lejeune, and our guest today is John Alexander. John Alexander has been flipping real estate for over 35 years and has been teaching others how to buy and sell property and notes since 1993. He is the author of 10 books in the note, financing, and real estate investment industry. John is known for creating and trademarking the inverse purchase and compound deed techniques. And in 2020, he trademarked Land Mogul for his innovative land flipping strategies. He is a best-selling author on Amazon and was a featured real estate trainer on national TV from 2005 to 2010. Over 100,000 people nationwide have purchased one of John's real estate courses. In addition to his educational contributions, John has written and sold several note discounting and real estate solution software applications. In the mid 1990s, John developed advanced methods of note purchasing that revolutionized the US market, empowering brokers he trained to excel in the field. In 1999, he pioneered the legal defense for wholesale flips using the concept of equitable ownership, and he introduced the novation method to the residential real estate marketplace through his inverse purchase technique. John, thanks so much for joining us. How are you today?
Hey, I'm doing great. Great to be back with you, Kendall. I always love talking with you, even from the first time we ever talked, which had nothing to do with a Zoom call. But
You're
love
right.
it.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you back on. I've been so thankful for your support through our entire endeavor of Only Land Fans. You were one of our very first guests. And
Yeah.
you're right, the very first time that we met, it was in a student mentor capacity. I am one of those 100,000 people nationwide who have purchased one of your courses. And I am so thankful that I get to be part of that lineage and that legacy. You have just created such an incredible legacy in the land space. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Kendall. Look forward to this today. I certainly
Yeah,
do.
so we're talking about a topic that is very, I think, fresh on a lot of people's minds for a lot
Yes.
of different reasons. There are many different factors that are just weighing in on this topic. And what we're talking about today is how the economic landscape for land flipping is changing and what to do to thrive in those upcoming changes. So let's start with a little bit of background. John, you've been in this industry for over 35 years. Can you give us a little bit of background about how you've seen the market change and that how the activity has changed from when you started to where we are now?
Surprisingly, it doesn't really change that much. It just cycles out. And that's great for us because we only have to learn so much. So once we get that so much down, we can tackle any kind of market that comes along. And so when I first got into it, we had 18, 17% interest rates. So it was at the height of the 1982 interest rate hikes that were going on back then. The market was horrible. Nobody wanted to buy or sell real estate. Very few, let's say very few could. But the land business was doing great. Of course, I was so young, I didn't know to question that. So I just went ahead and just went with it. I mean, we were selling sometimes 30 lots a month back then. And it was like the economic stuff really didn't affect us. So one of the things I have to say before we even get into the economics of this thing is that try to capture that youth, right? That youthful idea that we don't even know there's a problem out there. Even when I got into the furniture business later on, the same thing was happening. All these people around me, these older people mainly, oh, business is horrible. The credit is so hard. We can't get anybody approved on credit. That's all I heard. And I was like, we were just selling left and right furniture. So, and on credit. So you have to really be careful when you're listening to these so-called experts out there, including myself. All right. So you just have to take it with a grain of salt. We're going to tell you what patterns are and just the patterns that I've learned through the years. Sadly, I guess it was 5 years since I wrote that bio. So yeah, and sadly, I've been in the business now over 40 years. I remember when I was saying it was 25. So folks, it goes fast, but you can stay with this business long term if you can learn to survive these economic turns. And that's the main point I want to really cover today.
Yeah, that is fantastic. Really good insight Reminds me of my background. We've talked about this. My background, when I first got into the work the space of working, I was a teacher, and those kids don't know what's hard. So it's that same mentality of if you just going on that youthful tract of I don't know this is supposed to be hard, so we're just gonna rock and roll and meet those challenges where they are. So let's talk a little bit about where we actually are right now. What types of economic variables, maybe not even economic, maybe political, just what type of variables are affecting our market right now?
I'm going to say less on the, I'm going to actually say less on the political because the parties today are almost the same. The left and right, unlike it was back before, one tended to spend a lot of money, which means they had to raise taxes, and the other party tried to spend less money as a government and try to reduce the taxes. In my whole career growing up, those were the two parties, right? The Democrat or Republican. But now lately, after Bush came into office, it was okay, let's just spend. And they just started spending, and the Fed really is there to help that process by printing up as much money as they want. So that whole idea, I think, for the most part, is gone. So we're really looking at less about parties, more about, and it's important to vote parties because taxes are the most important thing to me as a business person. Who's going to be kindest to me? Who's going to let me keep as much money? So that's still going. I just look for who's going to tax me less, and hopefully who's going to make the government spend less, because that's where we get inflation from. So really, we can now dismiss the political party and look at what is the Fed doing, because the Fed, everything that's going on in the economy is being orchestrated by the federal chairman, Powell. So that's really the key to it right now.
Yeah, those are really good points. And the reason why I think probably even politics are in the lips of anyone in the land business or in business in general right now is just because it's a presidential election year. There's a lot of talk, especially in we've seen some of the seller activity slow down. We've seen some of the buyer activity slow down, but it's really good to hear that it's not as complex of a problem that that a lot of people like to make it out to be. So if you could talk to us a little bit about what are some of the patterns that you are currently seeing in the market today? Calling all ambitious land flippers, ready to transform your business with proven systems and processes? Imagine this. One of my students recently closed 2 land deals and got another under contract in just 24 hours. That's the power of a well-oiled land flipping machine. My exclusive coaching program is specifically designed for action takers just like you. We'll build out your entire operation from lead gen to dispo, implementing these systems on real deals from day one. But hurry, I'm only accepting 3 new students until 2025. If you've done deals, have a growth mindset, and are ready to scale, visit kindlecall.com now. Let's turn your land business into a consistent profit powerhouse.
I'm seeing something very similar to when we went from back basically in the 2008 meltdown. I'm seeing, and I'm going to leave out the cause of it because has nothing to do with what we're talking about here. But I'm talking about the lead up to it, which was a lead up to a recession. And we can see this almost on every recession that we lead up to. So obviously we've had this bond inversion that has just occurred, and now it's unwound itself. So now we're back to where our 10-year and 2-year bond are back to where it should be normally. And that is that final nail in the coffin that happens just months before a recession is officially announced by the government. So that's where we're at right now. And the reason why this is so similar to the 2008 crash was that this last 2 years was pretty much the same kind of, felt to me like it felt the same as the 2 years from 2006, 2007 that led up to the final 2008. We didn't see as much. I started seeing just the beginnings in 2005, but it was really 6 and 7. So it was this 2-year where everybody thought, okay, we're in a bubble and it's going to crash. So that's all you heard. And we've been hearing that, right? Everybody in this business has been here last 2, 3, 4 years actually now. We've been saying it's in a bubble, it's going to crash, but it hasn't. And it does tend to crash in the presidential years because that's when everything that they kind of band-aided together and false news and fake this and fake that. And hey, I got my buddy over here taking care of that, so nothing will fall apart. But all that comes crashing down at those changes, as it did in 2008 when we went from Bush, who band-aided everything up. And then when the next administration came in, of course, all of his stuff that he did and all the spending he did, we ended up having to pay the price for it. But the 2 year ramp up is basically something that I had been teaching for many years because I'd seen this on the other side of the recession as well. So you got this 2 year where we start to see the softening in the market. Prices start to ease down, but they haven't crashed or anything. We don't generally see a stock market crash either. Okay. And then we finally see this recession hit, and we see typically the stock market crashes, and we see somewhat of a real estate crash going on. I almost hate to call it a crash because it's not really a crash. It's just prices just start to tumble a little bit more. So that will continue typically for 2 years. I've been through 3 or 4 of these crashes, and that was the same pattern every time after the recession. It would take 2 years for the housing prices to solidify and start slowly going back up. Now, in the land space, which is what we're really talking about here, it's totally different, slightly different. So as long as you're smart about what you're doing in the land business, it doesn't really affect it that much. Yes, prices will go down, but we have a buyer base for that. That buyer base allows us to continue to flip land no matter what it is. But we are going to see prices drop in land. We already have started to see prices drop in land, by the way.
So, John, let me ask you this question. If someone's listening to this and they say, listen, I'm not really in tune with the markets, I don't really follow the Fed rate, and I don't get into all of that. All I'm trying to do is flip a lot and sell the lot. That's the business model. How is it? Can you give us a 30,000-foot view of how those economic changes trickle down and actually start affecting the market? People don't just look at the newspaper and say, "Oh,
Right.
we're in a recession. I got to lower my prices." So, how does that end up affecting the market?
When a recession hits, really what they're saying is that unemployment is starting to rise. So that means less people working. That means pay raises not going up the way that they were. That means families have less to spend. So down payments start to disappear. Monthly payments start to reduce. They don't disappear. All right. So if they can buy less, that's what they end up buying. So these are the two things that happen. And what's happening is your buyer market is shrinking. And so you just have to be able to gauge that and work with that as we go. We should see an interest rate reduction here coming up this month. In fact, probably on the 17th, we might see a quarter point reduction. And what that will do is it will reduce the mortgage rates. So they're already lowering them right now in anticipation of that, because the government's already told us they're probably, they don't ever tell you exactly, but they said they'll probably reduce it. So rates are already easing down. After they do reduce it, it will ease down more. They'll just see how much of a rate that they reduce it percentage wise, and that will dictate the next rate that we see. And then what that will do, it will it will enlarge that buyer base, because the people now can afford a little bit more house, maybe the house they were waiting for, maybe the down payment. So we get this slight increase. But in a recession, this is the problem, is that increase, it decreases very quickly. They just buy the house and it's over. And now the Fed has to then decrease the interest rate again to get another pool of buyers out there. And then they keep this process going probably for who knows, it could be another 2 or 3 years before they get the rate back down to where they want to get it to. And we've had time for the unemployment to go through. So remember, all through this time for the next couple of years, and it could be 4 or 5 years. Look back in the 80s, it took us 10 years to get out of that recession job wise. So for the job market to really bounce back, it really took a long time. But typically they don't. All right. So I'm anticipating 3 or 4 years, maybe at the worst. But as long as your unemployment is going up, and I'm going to give everybody a real quick key. This is the easiest way to predict prices on real estate. If your unemployment numbers are going up, that means that your prices, your home prices, land prices are going down. and
Mm.
vice versa. So all you have to do is just keep a tab on unemployment and know that you can follow that and predict what's going to happen with the numbers. So right now we've had a 1% increase in the unemployment rate, which means that prices should start to go down more than they have before. So be very careful right now on purchasing. All right. So we've got to purchase right. And ideally, flipping is the safest way of doing that because we're in and out before prices can slide. And the great thing about real estate is it moves so slow. So, like I said, it can take 2 years in this process of prices eventually getting down to the bottom before it turns, and then you're safe again. But during that down period, you've got to be able to go in and out quickly. Just try to position yourself where that happens rather than a buy and hold and hope next year that prices go up. Not right now. That's a bad strategy.
Yeah, that's really good insight. Now, you mentioned that the housing market is a bit different from the land market in terms of how they react to the economic environment. So, can you talk a little bit more about how it affects land specifically and what you're seeing in the land space?
Land typically goes down faster than house prices, and then it's like a what they call a dead cat bounce. It just there's no bounce to it. It just goes down and it just stays there, which is great for us because okay, now we know we're not going to lose any more. Where house prices can just slide and slide, you don't really quite know where the bottom is, and we've gotten there. So you can see in many areas right now land on the market is adding up. So you're seeing go to Zillow, you pull up a Zillow map, suddenly where you were looking, you're only seeing five or six for sale. Now you're seeing 50. I've seen 100 where I was seeing 20 before. Now I'm seeing 100. So that's telling you that this inventory is not moving at those prices. And that's really just a seller issue. It's not our problem. It's just the sellers who are saying, oh, I still want that 2022 price. That's what they're saying. And so they get a realtor that will list it at this unreasonable price and put it out there. Now, it's just a matter of time before they break and will sell at a better price. So all we're doing is we're just continually going back to the sellers and just letting them know the reality. Hey, this is where the market is today. This isn't 2 years ago. This is today's price. And here's as good as I can get, and then you work, and the rest of this is just, negotiation and rapport building with the sellers, and you'll get there.
Imagine having a complete toolkit for success right at your fingertips. That's exactly what you get with Only Land Fan School, our premium online community. For a low monthly fee, access our treasure trove of resources, the on-market deals course, acquisitions tool suite, and Dispo Secrets library. Plus, connect with fellow flippers in our active community. Whether you're hunting for deals or closing sales, Only Land Fan School has you covered with step-by-step guidance and insider knowledge. Ready to supercharge your land flipping journey? Join Only Land Fan School at olfschool.com today. Yeah, that's a really good point. I definitely take some education on the seller side. So, when you're looking at, you mentioned Zillow earlier, when you're looking at markets and people are afraid of like these market shifts are changing and sell-through rate becomes even more important, can you talk about what are some things that you look for when you're looking at, let's say, a new market that you're researching for sell-through rate? Are you changing how you approach what you're interested in or what your criteria is for going into particular market?
Not really. We're using the same strategies when we're looking at a market to pick a market. What are the days on market of the existing ones that have sold? So Zillow's great and Redfin, great about giving us that information. We in Texas have a harder time than the fine folks in Florida who have it all just laid out for them. But we have to look under, we're doing an Easter egg hunt every time, but we still do it, right? So all of this is possible. So we're just looking at the same things that we've always looked at, but we're sometimes negotiating a longer hold period. So if I'm flipping, for example, then I know that, okay, before I could flip this thing in a couple of weeks, and now today is going to be a couple of months. And if I can really spin my story right with a seller, maybe I get 3 months. And typically, in the slow markets, that's what I've always gone for is a 3 month hold period, giving me plenty of time to get that sold.
John, let me ask you now, you mentioned days on market, you've mentioned hold time. What are some sort of golden list bullet points that you would have for someone that's looking to flip in this market? It sounds like flipping is probably the easiest way or the best way to mitigate the risk that we're seeing in our market right now. What are some of those bullet points on your golden list that you would make sure that every deal that you do, this would be ideal?
Okay. When I look at a deal, the first thing I want to look at is what is my worst case scenario when I sell? That's the first thing you want to look at and figure out how are you probably going to sell in this market based upon what you've seen now from maybe looking at Zillow and seeing the sales. Maybe the numbers aren't there, but see, a lot of that I discount anyway because I'm going to bring something that most of these other sellers have not. And especially on the MLS, there's no seller financing typically going on in that marketplace. I want to look at it from the standpoint of seller financing. So in the last 25 years, me and a note, basically seller financing, it's right here, my best friend. Because what happens is when you take this note, probably five times more avenues of selling that using seller financing than just trying to do a cash transaction. So that's the first thing I would suggest, to make sure that you understand how to structure a seller finance deal, and also maybe look at being able to figure out how to do what we call a sandwich seller finance deal, where we're buying it on seller financing, very small down, hopefully zero interest rate, and as long as you can get on the term, but not too long. You don't want to really outstretch what you plan to sell it on. So typically, if let's say on $100,000 note, 15 years, 20 years is typically the time that I want to resell on, which means I need to buy it on that time frame as well. And so we can take both a difference in the cash price, sorry, the price of what we buy for versus what we sell for. So we get a cash flow, and we can also take a down payment difference. So maybe I can negotiate 2 or 3% down, and I've negotiated zero down. It's the rapport that you build with the seller and how much that you can get them to want them to help you help them. So it goes both ways. So if I can negotiate zero down or a couple thousand, or I say I'll pay the closing costs, that kind of a thing, that's the ideal kind of note to negotiate. Zero interest rate, and that now you're set up. You can actually sell it at the same price that you're buying it at, and you can have a $200, $300, $400 cash flow every month for 15 years. That's a great way of doing it. And by the way, when I started and we had this horrible interest rate, that was what we were doing. We were doing these arbitrage. It was simply buying it at one price and marking up and selling it at a higher price and taking the down payments and just doing one after another that way. I couldn't find enough deals to do that way. The appetite of buyers were crazy for seller financing in the worst financial recession of my life back then. So remember that today. It's always your seller financing will always be your out, no matter how bad it gets. Now, it may take a while for us to get, they could stretch this thing out for another year or two. We don't know. But when things really get bad out there, you can always do seller financing and make a living and be in this business a long time.
That's fantastic. It sounds like creative finance is king whenever we start getting into these higher interest rate and challenging markets. So can you walk us through, if someone's only used to ever flipping a lot just for a quick cash transaction, can you walk us through, give us an example of what would that life cycle look like of a deal? Maybe give us maybe a deal that you've done or just some examples. That way we can wrap our heads around some numbers. What does it look like from start to finish?
Every deal is different.
Right.
And the problem is when you've done as many deals as I have, there's a lot of different ways that a deal can be put together. I'll give you a couple of examples, two deals, because these are the most common ways that I flip property. And these two deals, I think I'll get what you're asking for. Okay, so one of the deals is when I'm having to give the seller more than what I should be giving them. And they've held their ground. This lady I have been talking to for 3-4 years, she kept saying no. So finally she needed the cash. And so who would she call? The guy who's been mailing the letters and I talked to him a couple of times and it was no's, but I was left on friendly terms, and I was the first person they called when they decided to sell. But still, and she was so smart. She held out until we were at the top of the market. And so it was a smart move on her part. This property was valued at, if I own or finance it, 60,000. If I sold it for cash, probably 45,000 in there. Okay. So she wanted 30 and I couldn't get her to budge off of it. Now, usually I go for a bigger spreads, but when they don't give me that ability to do a bigger spread, what I can do is look at it from the standpoint of maybe what I can do is sell it on owner financing and sell this note at closing, use that extra money because you're going to get a bump of money at that point to pay her off. So she gets her 30, and then I'm still going to walk away with about 10, 12. I think I walked away with 13,000 on that deal just by selling it at that from 60,000 and buying it from her at 30. So that's a very common way that I look at deals to price them out to begin with. I look and say, if I created a note on it and sold the note, that creates a certain amount of money and the down payment comes in, that's a certain amount of money that adds to that. So I've got all this money sitting there on the closing table, and how much can I give the seller? And then the rest is mine. So you can look at a deal like that. The next deal that I'll go through with you was simply, I tried a couple of different ways of exiting this property at a higher price and shot myself in the foot because I was expecting too much. So I bought this property. I offered 20,000 for it, and he came back and told me that's a deal. Fine. So he needed to sell, and I didn't know why he needed to sell. And then a couple of weeks after we signed the contract at 20, he came back and asked me, "Can you speed it up because I need this cash by next week because I've got to pay some hospital bills for my wife. She's getting new teeth put in, and she's got to go out of the country to do it." And so I said, "No, I can't. We already have a deal. If you're willing to take a discount on it, I could pay you less and we could speed it up." So now, because he's forcing me into a situation where I've got to buy this property cash, which I don't want to. Usually I just tie it up and I flip it. So they're getting their money and I'm getting my money. I said, I would give you 12,000. So I know at 12,000, I'm just going to make a killing on it because I was going to list this property for $100,000. That was the spread on it. It was incredible. It was a great find. Those are not common. Typically, I might be selling a property like that at 40, 50,000, but this was just an amazing find. And he and I were talking about this property. And when they talk or give you too much information or start to ask you to change your deal, my philosophy, which is what I teach all my mentoring students, ask them for something in return. Don't ever let a seller or a buyer ask you for a favor on your deal after you've got something signed and agreed to without asking them for something that's going to hurt. Because if you do that and you give in to them, guess what? Next week, they're going to come back and ask you for something else and something else. And finally, they're just going to kill the deal. So
Right.
never let him get away with that. So that's why I came back and hit him at 12,000 and we got a deal. And he said yes, that he needed the money. All right. So I put that deal together. I put it up for sale for 100,000. I had a lady come in and she offered 100. I think I put it up for 110. She came in for 100. I told her, no, how about 105? She absolutely just turned around, just disappeared on me. So you do have to be careful when in your negotiation. But she left. And then from there, we found out that the property had more problems. So sometimes properties have these unexpected things. Again, why we buy land so cheap. Sometimes you can be in this business like me, 40 years, and you can still miss things that are a problem. So the county told me, yes, it definitely has this and that on it, water, etc. But as it turned out, it didn't. So now I've got a property with no water, no sewage, which is what I thought I had, and it would have been priced right at that. I was still able to sell that property for 45,000 cash. So that's the other kind of a deal. So you just come down on the price slowly. It had been established at 110. So the guy who bought it at 45 thought he was making a killing, and he did. And they're going to just run a well and stuff. So yeah, it's all fine. That's why I also say all land sells at some price. You just have to figure out what price it'll be. But
There
those are
you
the
go.
typical deals. Sometimes you can sandwich it. So if I had to, I was prepared to owner finance it. So if he hit me up when I priced it at 60 for owner financing, I would have said, yeah, let's do owner financing. And I want 10 down, or I want 12 down. That way I get my money back that I paid for the property. And now it's 100% profit every month coming into me. So these are the
Beautiful.
basic strategies we use.
Hey there, land fans. If you're enjoying this episode and would like to see more episodes like this, please be sure to let us know by liking and subscribing below.
Yeah, that's beautiful. John, you mentioned in the first example that there was a cash price of 45,000, there was a finance price at 60,000. Can you talk a little bit about how much more do you mark up a property from the cash price if you're going to be offering financing on that property? Is there a rule of thumb, or is it just
There's not, it's less art. It's pretty simple. There's two ways of coming up with that number. One is if your plan is to sell the note, then you need to look at what the typical prices are selling for, or even currently listed for sale in that area. And that will be my top price. That will establish. And in this particular place, it was 65,000, 60 to 65,000 in this area. So that's where I got that price from. The other way of looking at it is, if you're not going to sell the note, you're going to hold on to it. There's no rule. And the great thing about land is there's no appraisers, because there's the only person that really sees value in a piece of property is going to be that person buying it. And there's no two pieces of property that are alike. There's plenty of homes that are alike, 2 bedroom, 2 bath. They're 2,500 square foot, right down to that. But in a piece of land is, I like this area. I like because it's this close to this. I like this giant trees that none of these other properties next door have. It's completely subjective. And therefore, every piece gets priced accordingly. I'm buying a piece of property right now. It turns out it's in a flood zone that can basically carry, when it floods, 10 feet of water on it. Now you can build up above it, because thank God it's in a county that they allow that. The price, what we thought it was going to be at 75, suddenly we're down to 50 now on it, and may go lower. It depends on what we end up with. But we're offering owner financing. So it opens up a broad buyer base who say, I can't afford that $100,000 property that's perfect and everything, but I don't mind putting a mobile home on this land and putting it on pillars that are 10 feet high and create a stairs. So every piece of land has a buyer out there. We just have to match them up.
That's really good. That last soundbite right there, I think, should go on every land investor's wall in their office. Every single property has a buyer. So let me ask you this question, John. You talked a little bit about the importance of negotiating these favorable terms that will allow you to carry these properties or carry contracts for 3 months. How do you go about talking with sellers, negotiating? We know this is probably, it's a process that has to develop over time, but what are some rules of thumb that you could give us for how you approach sellers?
What I don't want to do is negotiate where I don't have to.
Hmm.
So the time that I want to tie this up, that's one of those things I don't want to have to negotiate unless they bring it up. So I never, ever bring it up. Now you'll see a lot of wholesalers, they've been trained, we'll do a quick close, 30 days, and they bring it up. Now they're locked in to 30 days.
Right.
You don't need to do that. Just leave that out of the equation. The sellers don't know what the standard time is for a property. Yeah, we as investors, we know. We also know what the typical earnest money is. We know typical everything. But most people with property don't know, and they, quite frankly, in the land side, they don't care. So when they get my contract, is the first time they see 45, 60, 90 days. I've gone up to 6 months. Now they can come back and they can say, this 4 months you're asking for, it seems long. And then I explain, the market is crazy right now, and so there's a lot I've got to do. There's a lot that I've got to prepare. And the way I set them up in my negotiation, because I have techniques where I don't necessarily come across as, hey, I'm your buyer, but I come across as, I can help get this sold using my advertising, my techniques that I use. I do social media, all this kind of stuff. So I'm building in their head, they're seeing that, okay, yeah, I can see where he needs time. And so it doesn't even come up because of that. So Pretty much, can't even remember the last time somebody came back to me and asked me about time. They just signed it.
Wow. Yeah, that's incredible. And I so agree with you. The way that you frame the expectation for the seller, that can make or break in any type of negotiation, right? And so I love that nugget that don't bring it up. Don't bring
Don't
it
bring
up
it
until you
up.
have to.
Yeah, I
That's
do the same.
fantastic.
I do the same thing with earnest money. I never bring up earnest money. The first time they see it is when they get my contract. And now it's whatever I say on there, which is usually zero because sometimes I don't even have a number written in there. I have for valuables for mutual promises. That's it, because that's what the law says. So we can go into contract. Now, if I were doing a larger deal, like if I was doing a house deal, I'd want earnest money on the table. And in some states like Florida, you have to have it because a judge will in Florida will look at it and say, "Oh, there's no earnest money; it's not legal." And I've seen them pop them out, but that's really not what the law says. But there's customs in certain areas, but it doesn't tell you how much, right? So in Florida, we for years we just use when we were doing house flips there, we use $100. If I were doing something there today, I do the same thing. I just use $100. And not necessarily in my cases, it depends on who I'm dealing with. But there's some sellers they're not going to call the title company. We may not even close with a title company because I do such creative deals. We sometimes it's just when I call you, we're going to close, and that's when I'm sending over a notary to get everything signed and sent back. So there's a lot of different ways of doing the land business that you don't usually do in the house business. It gives you a lot of extra opportunities, and it's just easier for me. It's just easier to do land.
Yeah, that's one of the things I love so much about the land industry is that it can be a blank slate in many cases where it's just limited to your creativity and your imagination, which is really cool. It allows you to be a problem solver.
Yeah.
So, John, can you talk a little bit about how you approach selling notes? So if someone is listening to this and they say, okay, I never thought about the sandwich technique and then I sell the note. Can you talk a little bit about how you find buyers for these notes?
First of all, I'm a buyer. So if you're if you are doing a note in Texas, I would be interested in looking at the note and probably buying it. We have some pretty easy terms, and if they basically have a job and we can say that they're stable in that way, then I'm interested. But if you're in another state, or maybe you're doing, maybe you don't want to bring your note to me, you look for investors who are looking for a good, stable investment and a great return on their investment. This can be you can be anywhere from your doctor to your accountant may know people themselves that they deal with that are looking for good opportunities. So it's a matter of you educating the people that you already know about what you do. And one of the things you can do is just start hitting them up about what you do and describing the note side of it. So don't try to get them to come in as a JV partner on a house or a land flip necessarily, but just from the note side so that it's hands free. So most of these professionals, they don't want to go look at property or deal with the toilets and everything. They just want money coming into their mailbox every month. And this is the way that you can do it. So you can find these investors. You can also, of course, join different groups. You can go on Facebook groups and go into and just ask around who will buy this note, and you'll find somebody. If it's a good note, it's going to find a home because we can't find enough notes. I'm literally out. Sometimes I'm on my hands and knees begging people go get notes and bring them back. Go put these creative, which for me the easiest deal is to go and put creative deals together and bring them back. And this is something I've been doing. I did this with houses back in the early 2000s. We were also doing this with houses. So we would go create the note on the house. I'd buy the note from them, and boom, we got somebody with owner financing into a house and flipping the houses. And it can be done. It's still to this day, it can be done both ways. I do have one of my books goes into that, how to flip discounted notes, how to flip
Mm.
discounted notes. This one, I give you some sources, cheap plug, but this is on Amazon. And
It's a great book. It's a great book.
oh, you have that. That's
Yeah, I
right.
do have this. Yeah.
And in here, I give you some sources on where to now sell those. By the way, I just updated this book in August of last year. So the latest buyers of notes that I utilize and recommend are in the new version.
Excellent. Very good. Yeah, definitely check out that book if you're interested at all in the note game. So, can you talk a little bit about, and I'm sure this is in your book, but what are some of the terms that you like to see when you are buying notes as a note buyer?
I like to see a note that makes sense. So when I say that, I'm saying that what a note that doesn't make sense is probably easier to describe. Something with 2% interest, that's for $50,000 and it's or $20,000 amortized over 30 years with a payment of $150 a month. That makes no sense, right? So there's no real way to capture that or even buy that at anything that would be realistic. So what we look for are what we call a tight note. So a tight note is going to be where we can maximize everything about that note. What you're going to want to maximize on that is make sure that you don't overextend that note on terms or monthlies. So a general rule I follow is that I try to keep the monthly payment in line, just like rent is when we look at a house. If it's $100,000 house or $300,000 house, we can expect maybe $3,000 rent on that house. So that's the same with a note. So if I have $100,000 note, I want to see maybe something around $1,000 monthly payment on there. And the way you get to that payment is by adjusting the term of the note, which is how many months, and the interest rate. And that will
Mm.
get you to around that $1,000, give or take 100, 150. What it doesn't really matter, but as long as we're in there and it's not $500 a month for $1,000, it should be $1,000. That's double. All right. So we're getting, we're just now it makes sense. It's a tight note. So just adjusting your terms and your interest rate and get it to that same rental icon that we've always had in the real estate business.
Excellent. Very good. Now, can you talk a little bit about what are some different exit strategies for seller finance? You mentioned that there are quite a few. We've talked about some today already. Are there any others that you are seeing that are working really well to access those bigger buyer pools right now?
If you want to, if you want to always act, if you want to access a bigger buyer pool, then you can adjust your down payment down. So typically right now you can get 15% down on most land deals at 20% even. So people still have enough cash to do that. They expect to pay that and they're able to do that. But if your buyer pool shrinks on you for some reason, then there's nothing stops you going down to 10%. And really there's nothing stops you going down to 5% if you're doing volume. So one of the things that I did when I first started this business is I worked in volume. We were doing like 20, 30 a month. And so we could work on extreme low amounts of down payment and our down payment almost matched our monthly. And we were able we would just sail right through that. And that was an idea I picked up by reading a book by the people out who developed out the Ozarks way back in the 50s. And the guy who did that in Florida, he wrote a book about what he did. And he had the ads and everything. And I remember seeing, wow, that's a really low down payment. I want to buy it. I'm thinking I could buy a
Right.
piece of land, right? So that never escaped me. So when I started with the land business, I thought, okay, let's lower that down payment. And yeah, it sold us right through there. And all of our competition started doing the same thing. And it just exploded the business model everywhere where we were doing this because everybody were just basically copying this idea. But yeah, you can lower that. Obviously, you can lower the monthly payment, but you don't want to do that if you can help it because that's really where your cash flow and your return on your investment comes from. So that's the one thing you want not to mess with if you can help it. And the higher that is, the better. So that's the idea there.
Excellent. So diving into seller financing a little bit more, I'm seeing a lot more people that said, I'll never do seller financing. They're just interested in the cash because the cash feels good. But now they might be a little bit more hard pressed and might be a little bit more encouraged to get into the seller financing game in the current market. And so if those people are listening to this, they're not really super familiar with seller financing, what are some rules of thumb that you could give them to say, okay, this is typically about how long the term should should be. This is how you present it to the seller. This is how you structure the deal. Can you give us a 30,000-foot view of that?
Yes, but the way that I go about it is in the negotiation, because most sellers don't want to offer owner financing. Not
Mm,
yet. All right. Now, in a couple of years, it will be standard, because that's about where I came in. It was quite easy. Everybody, I could just call somebody and they were ready to owner finance. It wasn't even a discussion about cash prices. All right. But
wow.
at the start, when you're at the still beginning, we haven't even got to the recession yet. They're still in this cash mentality. So you have
Right.
to take them from that mentality to an owner finance.
Mm.
And the way you do that, and I teach this in a very extended fashion because there's more steps to it than what I'll do, but I'll give you the 30,000 square foot. I'm in real estate. It's a
You're in real
30,000
estate
square
mode,
foot
John.
vision. So what we do is we start with a negotiation where we get to know the word no. This is what you have to do. If you want to do owner financing, you have to get the seller to the position of no on your cash price.
Mm.
All right. So if you get a yes on your cash price, you shot yourself in the foot and it's over. So logically, what does that mean? It means you have to go in very low. It means you have to have a ridiculously low price that they say no to. But a ridiculously low price does allow you to do a note purchase and you're back in.
Love it.
This is what I teach. I teach a two-step strategy. We go in with a low cash price. If they say yes, boom, we're doing a note sell and we got the deal. If they say no, now we've got them to the point where they've said no, that's dead, and you're getting off the phone with them. You're hanging up on them. It's over. And then, but before I get off the phone, we're saying a little different things, and there's other points to it. But one of the ideas is you say, if I can come up with something, I'll give you a call back. But right now, I don't see how it can be done. Click, bye. And then we wait a couple of days as you're in the training. Then we
Yeah.
call them back. And then we say, oh, it just occurred to me, I might have a way to get you your price. Now there might, and all this is psychology. So it's the way we present it to them. I might be able to get to that price of the 60,000 that you're wanting. And then we go silent. We let them get excited and they're like this. And they're saying, okay, come on, give it to me. I knew if I held out, I got it. And then we break down the idea of, if you're willing to take this out on payments or stretch this out a ways with me, I can get that price to you. So that's a good strategy overall to get somebody to go from somebody that would, if you had hit them up with an owner finance, they would have said no, never even thought twice about it. I'll just wait for the cash guy. But this strategy is different. And we're playing with psychology. We're playing with psychology and we're doing it for their own good. Right now, these sellers, these poor sellers, I remember going through it hurt me. It hurt me because I've been through it several times. But I was telling these sellers in 2007, you need to sell now because we're going to have a recession and your prices are going to go, no, we're fine. It'll bounce back if it does. And even when it's going down, there's like, it's going to bounce right back. And of course, it never did. And it got worse and worse. And now they sold at a horrible loss. That's what these sellers are faced with right now. So we can get them in and we can move it and we can lock somebody else in there. Then we're out. So we got everything done. Everybody's happy. Everybody can afford the payment. Everything's done. And we help them.
Yeah,
So
providing that solution. That's so good. And so what are the typical, I know every deal is very different, but what are the typical lengths of time are you seeing sellers accepting when you're putting something under like a seller finance type situation?
it depends on the values that we're talking about. So
Right.
there's deals out there where you can conceivably go out there and you can put $1 million deal together, and that time frame is totally different than a $30,000 time frame.
For sure.
But typically, for what beginners going into this and working your typical deal under 200,000, basically, you're looking at just matching and creating the note so that you start with the end buyer in mind and create that note. Now we have that note. And see, and for our members, I have these spreadsheets. I've already created all these. So you can just put the notes, you create the notes side by side and you can see how to create it and it feeds itself a lot of the information already. But what you're doing is you're looking at what you're going to sell it for. And now as long as you buy it less than that, you're good. And you're going to make the difference. So if it's The difference between the down payment, that's the money in your pocket. The difference between the monthly payment, that's a cash flow every month in your pocket. So we might be structuring a deal at 0 interest rate or even 3. I don't mind giving somebody 3% interest. It's almost practically nothing. And so if I have to, I'll go there, but I'm going to start with 0 and see if they say yes first. So what we do is we structure that note, and then we're going to take the difference. And that difference, oftentimes, even on a $50,000 note, can be 200 or 300 a month difference just by having that difference in the interest and maybe a bump on the price a little bit. So you can structure these notes out pretty well. And at 100,000, you can easily get yourself into a $400 or $500 a month cash flow for 15 years. And we have students doing it all the time. They'll text me and they'll say, John, I've got a deal we just did. We basically bought the property, paid it off with a down payment, and now I've got a 15-year note at $1,000 a month. So for
Beautiful.
15 years, he's getting $1,000 a month. It's a lot of fun because you can get creative because there's so many of these deals that are sitting out there, and all you have to do is hit the right one and bingo, you hit a jackpot. And the others, so what? You make 200 or 300 a month, and you just set that over to an escrow company that collects it and sends out the checks, and you don't even bother, it just shows up in your bank. And then you forget about it unless you have to someday take it back on a foreclosure. And if you do, in our business on land, we can only dream that would happen, but I haven't had a foreclosure in the last 13 years that I've just been doing only land, not one foreclosure. But if I have to take something back, I'm selling it all over again and getting that big down payment again. And there's a lot of equity sitting there if they do not perform.
Yeah, that's really good stuff. Hey, so can you talk a little bit about, we've talked about some seller psychology earlier. I've heard you speak on this topic about how you position price, and we talked a little bit about the importance of setting up expectations and frameworks. Can you talk a little bit about how you first introduce price? Because I think I've heard you speak about this topic, and it's been a little bit different from some of the other sort of mainstream thought
Yeah.
processes. Do you ask a seller, hey, how much do you want for the property? Do you offer it first? Can you talk a little bit about that?
To approach it, I tiptoe into the initial conversation and I try to get a read as fast as I can on the seller and get their personality down. And then that tells me really what I should do. But in general, I like to mention price first. So you'll see most wholesalers out there teaching, and most land people as well teaching, don't get the other person to mention price first. If I'm looking at a property that I'm okay giving them a fair price, I'm okay giving them a fair price, even if I could get it. My price is already going to be at half price, maybe 30 or 40 cents on the dollar sometimes. If I get that price, I'm happy. But what I learned is that if you mention price first, you have the advantage because what you're doing is you're anchoring a price in their mind. They have many times in land, they have, unlike a house is completely different. Okay. And I could see those strategies working on a house, but in land, it's just the opposite. So they oftentimes, sometimes they do, but a lot of times they don't have an idea of, really where it should be. And they are expecting you to come in with an offer. And actually, sometimes they're mad if you don't make them an offer. So yeah, I'm going to make them an offer. But it's always going to be a low offer. It's going to be lower than where I know I'm going to make a profit, guaranteed, right? But if I can anchor that price, then I get rid of these people that are in their mind, they're saying, oh, I'm going to get what the county said it's worth, or that and a half more, however they've come up in their mind, or they heard a rumor of what lot down the road sold for. So I can position and anchor a price down. So I look on Zillow and I find the lowest possible price I can find. And that's generally where I'm going to anchor my price to. And Zillow, 2 inches over on Zillow, and you could be in a flood zone with really low anchoring prices to play with. And we can't be afraid to say, oh, this property probably isn't a flood zone, but you don't know what other problems this property has. It could have a sinkhole in the middle. It could have a creek running down the middle. You don't know, and probably you won't find out until you put it up for sale. And the end buyer goes out there, walks the property, and then calls you and say, "Hey, there's a pile of tires in here and the guy says it's going to cost me $5,000 to move them, I want a reduction of $5,000. So this is my philosophy. We just go in, we just negotiate as hard as we can.
That's really good. On that advice, I actually had a cold calling lead gen set up. And on that advice, I actually took that question out because a lot of times the cold callers are going to ask, do
Much
you
they
own this
want.
property? Do you want this? And then how much do you want for the property? And that sets you up for an uphill battle. So I have removed that altogether on your advice, and I've made that advice has paid many times over just the price of your mentoring. So thank you for sharing that. Really good stuff. As we move into the next 6 months, the next 12 months, what are some of the biggest takeaways that you could give to anyone in the land industry right now if you had to just give them some parting words of, if you want to thrive in this economy, this is what you've got to do?
Know you've got buyers ready to buy if you can buy at the right price. That's the best advice I can give you. And don't worry about it. It will take care of itself, because the minute you put something under contract and you put it up for sale and you can't sell it, that's not the right price. And what's the worst thing that can happen right now? Really nothing. You can go back to the seller and say, unfortunately, you didn't get this sold quick enough. You waited too long. I would love to blame them. I don't use those exact words, but I use this tone that makes it their fault that they missed out on selling at the top of the market. I send some of my mailers, so they go out and we're at the top of the market, so that eventually when they do call me and they want to sell, I will just refer back to the letter I sent you last year when I told you we were at the top of the market. Then you should have sold them. But you know what? We're going to make it happen. Yada, yada. And I'm back on their side and I'm fighting for them. So that's some of the psychology that goes into this.
That is brilliant. That is brilliant. I want to thank you so much for sharing so much insight and wisdom. It's just an embarrassment of riches, the amount of wisdom that you've given us today. What are you currently looking for? How can we give back to you?
I'm always looking for notes to buy in Texas. So if you have land notes, please contact me. You can actually submit a note to me online at johnalexander.com. That's my name, johnalexander.com/note, NOTE. And that will walk you through the process of getting that into me. The other thing is, if you are looking that you're wanting to maybe get into a mastermind group where you can learn all these techniques and everything, pretty much everything that I have put together over 40 years in the land business, commercial, everything that I've done. I've taken everything and distilled it for the land business only. So every technique I teach, like novation, for example, for novations for land, all these different techniques I put into my mastermind. So if you're in the mastermind, you have access to all of these. There's probably over a good 150 hours of techniques in there that most of you won't have to use, but if they're there and you get into a deal, you can always go and find out more details about that particular transaction. Subdivisions, you name it, it's covered in there. That is at landmogul.com. So if you want to join me there, I've done that. I've also, because we are coming into recession time, I usually charge a flat fee. I've given you, because in anticipation of this, Kendall, I made a monthly payment in there. So if you want to come in at a reasonable monthly payment, you can get in there now at a reasonable monthly payment.
That's fantastic. Practicing what you preach. I open up
Right.
the buyer pool, right? That's
Yeah, got
so
to open up the
good.
buyer pool, make it easy to make payments.
I love that. I love that. And I cannot speak more highly of John's program. I am in it and I cannot tell you how much value I've gotten out of it. And what he says about that 150 hours, it is just a valuable resource. I go there very regularly to check and say, okay, how can I do this? So definitely check out John's programs. We'll have all of those links in the show notes as well as in the video description. Awesome. Thanks so much, John. This has been absolutely incredible. Again, I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for all of your support of the Only Land Fans podcast, and just always a treat to get to talk to you. I always learn something new every single time. So thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you, Kendall. And now I'm learning from you, sir. So
Oh
in
gosh,
fact,
well,
just a couple of weeks ago, I went back. Actually, last week I went back. I missed one of your episodes and didn't want to miss it, so I went back and listened to it, because
oh
you guys
gosh.
I don't know how you do it, but you get the most amazing guests in here.
It's because of people like you. It's because of people like you that are just incredible supporters and again, adding to the rich voices that we've had here on the show. You're definitely one of those founding fathers, I would say, of our guests. So thank you so much for that. And yeah, please catch in with John. He's absolutely amazing. Again, I cannot speak any higher of him than I possibly could. I know that there are tons of colleagues in the land space as well that you have. Uncle John is one of the one of the terms that you have that we so lovingly call you. He is really one of the godfathers of land. So please make sure that you check out his rich resources and communities, and we'll post all of that good information, those links if you want to grab them. We'll post those in the show notes again. But John, thank you so much. Always a pleasure. Thank you guys so much for joining us and for the wonderful questions. Go out, make some magical things happen. We'll catch you in the next one. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
If you're interested in hearing from other 6- and 7-figure land flippers about how they've built and run their businesses, then check out my group, Only Land Fans, where I do a live interview each week inside the group. You can grab that link at the description below. Until then, be great, have a great week, and catch you in the next one.